I'm Karen Wooten with Big One, and I'm sitting here with Congressman Griffith. He is from the 9th District out of Virginia, and your district encompasses the Southwest Virginia. So you have like Abingdon area, Bristol.
We also have those areas sometimes called the Allegheny Highlands and a big chunk of the south side as well. So I always tell folks, if you draw a line, it's not completely perfect, but if you draw a line from Covington down just on the other side of Roanoke and then to Martinsville, it's everything else in the state of Virginia.
Okay. All right. So I'm thinking right now, you're a very busy man. There's a lot that's going on up here, up on the Hill in D.C., along with talking about not only the Affordable Care Act, but the government shutdown. So
Yes, ma'am.
what is your position of what's going on here in D.C. and the gridlock?
Well, I think what we have to have happen is that the Senate has to talk to the House. You know, it's been very interesting to watch. The Senate says they won't negotiate. The President says he won't negotiate. Sometimes you hear them say, well, we won the election. Well, they won the presidency and they kept the Senate, but they didn't win the House. And that means you have to negotiate. We recognize we won't get everything we want. Now, we put everything we wanted on the table, but we recognize we won't get everything we want, which is why we actually sent over several compromises after our initial offer, because we know that you don't get everything you want when you don't control all three of the bodies involved in making these decisions. That being said, the President and Harry Reid need to realize that because they don't control the House, they need to negotiate with us. We were elected by the people just as they were, and we all need to sit down at the table and have a conversation and get this thing done.
Agreed. So what are you hearing from your constituents? I'm sure you're getting phone calls in your office.
Yeah.
So
there are very many people who are frustrated, and
Yeah.
it's understandable, particularly when you have situations where the parkway is open. Blue Ridge Parkway is in my district. It's open, but the Park Service has been given instructions to their folks to close down all the businesses that are along the parkway, like Mabry Mill, and then there's also the situation that happened in North Carolina where they actually sent out, patrol cars with the lights flashing and the officers standing there with their guns. Not that they were threatening, but they were just telling people, you can't go in here. Well, how does that make any sense? These businesses don't receive any federal dollars. And then there's the side effects of that. Because Mabry Mill is closed down, then what happens is not as many visitors go to the parkway because that's a big attraction. And then in Meadows of Dan, which is right off of the parkway, there are not as many people there to buy their products.
So the businesses suffer.
The businesses are suffering, and this is their big month. For them, this is like Toys R Us Christmas.
Yeah, it's the fall. The leaves are changing.
Yeah.
The apples, everything.
Yeah, everything. And so they're being greatly impacted, and they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be. But so I'm hearing from those folks, and these are compelling and legitimate stories. And you hear from other folks. We're also hearing from a lot of folks who say, look, we understand this is bigger than just my job, or bigger than just what's happening to me.
Yeah.
But people are frustrated, and I think they have a right to be, because, if your kids are fighting, once you separate them, you then say, all right, y'all sit down and sort this out, if it's something that can be sorted out. And this is something that should be sorted out. But the Senate and the President are refusing to talk to the House Republicans, and that, to me, doesn't make any sense. We had a lot of fights when I was in the Virginia General Assembly, but I can never remember a time when we wouldn't talk to each other. Sometimes we didn't agree. Sometimes we came to short-term impasses, but we always talked.
That's why this country was founded with multiple areas where you could debate.
Right.
You have multiple departments for that reason. You have the Senate, the House,
Absolutely.
the Executive.
It was set up
That's
that
what it doesn't
way.
make sense to me why there is so much gridlock.
Well, one of the interesting things is people always say, well, why did you pass this bill when you know the Senate won't take it up? Well, Jefferson actually envisioned that each house would make a separate decision, and that's in the Jefferson Manual of Parliamentary Procedure that he wrote. He said each house has to make their own decision without worrying about what the other house will do.
Yeah.
But today, for some reason, it's considered bad by some people, but I've heard both Republicans and Democrats say these things from time to time, so it's not just the Democrats. But they think it's bad for the House to make its decision and then the Senate to make its decision like it's supposed to all be worked out in the head. It's not supposed to be worked out ahead. You're supposed to have this conflict, and then you're supposed to sit down around the conference table when conferees, which is one of our words for negotiators,
Mhm.
are appointed by each side.
Yep.
Well, Harry Reid's refused to even appoint people to sit at the table. So it's very frustrating right now.
Yeah. What about the Blue Ridge Parkway? Is there anything you can do from the state?
Well, unfortunately,
Legislation
some
for that,
states,
or-
there's a blended situation. That is not the case with the Blue Ridge Parkway,
Okay.
particularly for those businesses right on the parkway. Their access
It's
is the parkway.
unfortunate.
Well, it is unfortunate. It's never happened. There have been 17 shutdowns before. This kind of an action related to the parkway and the national monuments that people have heard about has never happened before. So Clinton didn't think that was necessary in '95. Reagan didn't think it was necessary when there was a series of shutdowns when Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House.
So why now?
So why now? And,
Yeah.
and the answer may come from, there was a report in one of the newspapers that said that a angry park ranger had said to this reporter, we were given instructions to make things as painful as possible.
Oh,
And that's not a way
goodness.
to run a government.
That's
It's
just
just not.
wrong.
It is wrong. It's
Yeah.
one thing to have a conflict, it's one thing to have pain, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's not, you shouldn't go out and intentionally inflict additional pain on the American people because you're mad at the House.
Hardworking American people that are running businesses,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
So speaking of that, you are in an area that is coal country.
Yes, ma'am.
I walked in your office and I see coal everywhere, and coal is so important to the state of Virginia.
It is.
So talk to me about the EPA and what is going on specifically in your district, or even for the state of Virginia with regards to coal.
Well, bottom line is that the EPA and this administration do in fact have a war on coal. They will deny it, but when you look at all the regulations they put out in just the last few years, there's no question they're trying to eliminate coal. And they sell it, and unfortunately a lot of people buy it because they don't stop and look at the facts and follow the dots and think about it. Well, we're going to clean up the air. Well, the truth of the matter is that the rest of the world is using more and more coal. And the estimates are that it will average out internationally at about 40% of the energy mix will be coal going on into the future. You have places like Mozambique and Malaysia and all of the Asian countries which are tending to use more and more coal. They may be looking for other things, but as their economies grow, they're going to continue to use more coal. So what happens is, we're letting those countries clean our clocks in the industrial marketplace. When our manufactured goods go up to compete against that, because we don't want to use coal, we're raising the cost of our electricity, we're raising the cost of making goods in the United States. Some of those jobs then go overseas to these places that where they can compete better because the energy prices are low and wages are low. We don't want to compete with them on wages.
Yeah.
But we can beat them on energy prices if we will use our God-given natural resources, oil, coal, natural gas, the whole gamut. And I'm not against solar and wind, but we ought to be using our coal because here's what happens. According to a NASA study,
Okay.
it takes 10 days for the air to go from the middle of the Gobi Desert to the eastern shore of Virginia. So what we're doing is if people, it's not like we get air just over Southwest Virginia or we get air just over Virginia. That air is circulating globally, particularly in the northern hemisphere. And what happens is that because we're sending our jobs to places that many of us have never heard of before, in parts of Asia, in India, you name it, they're sending that air back to us. We're getting the air pollution. Guess what? They don't even have the reasonable regulations we had, say, 10 years ago. As a result of that, we're actually, I believe, making the air dirtier in the United States by refusing to recognize the new technologies that will let us use coal. We have this new plant in Southwest Virginia that Dominion opened up, and it is one of the cleanest facilities in the world. It's brand new as of a year ago. The technology is spectacular. It doesn't meet the new regs that the EPA has put out, and so there won't be another coal-fired power plant built if those regs are left to stand. And we will be shipping more of those jobs overseas, and I believe sending more pollution back. Now, in fairness, between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachians, by the time it gets to most of Virginia, most of that pollution has been knocked down. But when you look at the stats for, mercury, for example, that comes from other countries, in the western part of the United States over to the eastern, to the Mississippi, basically, something like 80% of the mercury in most parts of the West come from other countries. They don't come from our own power plants. They come from other countries. And we really ought to be, working to keep jobs here, keep businesses here, keep our energy low, whether you're a business or a homeowner, you want to keep that electric bill down.
Yeah, it's expensive.
We ought to be working on that, and even though the new technologies that make things cleaner are expensive, they're not nearly as expensive as what the EPA wants.
So why don't I, as an average American, know about these studies from NASA about this air, and why is there such a war on coal then?
Well,
It's what it's called. It's called a war on coal.
it's a 10-second soundbite to say, but we're cleaning up the air, and we don't want to have people
Yeah,
gasping for
doesn't
air.
make any sense.
And when you look at the facts, the EPA always uses the same number of people who have the same ailments over and over and over again. Doesn't matter what regulation it is, we're saving this number of people from asthma attacks, we're saving this number of people from, COPD. Well, they can't use them for all of those things, and different people have different problems. I mean, I have a son who has asthma issues. His number one problem are trees. I'm not advocating we get rid of trees,
That's true.
but that's his number one problem.
Yeah.
Is that he's allergic to every tree in our yard.
Everything green.
Everything green. And so he takes 2 medications every night. We have
Wow.
creams that we put on his skin from dealing with other allergies. I mean, so we're paying attention to this, and I'm sensitive for those people who have problems. But there has to be a balance, and we have been cleaning the air up, and that's the history of the EPA for the first decade, 15, 20 years is pretty good. They've just gone overboard. There always needs to be that balance. And while we're talking about coal and technologies, because I get excited about
I
this.
know, I can tell you're so passionate about
But
coal.
there's some new technology out there that we're going to be able to test, hopefully start the testing by the end of this year, that will eliminate, all of the pollution with the exception of carbon dioxide, if you consider that a pollutant, which the EPA does. That's the stuff we're breathing out right now, so I'm polluting as I speak.
Plants need that, right?
Plants
Yeah.
need that. And the
I
whole
learned
life
that
cycle
second
needs
grade.
it, that's right. But it's been deemed, and if you're producing too much carbon dioxide, I recognize that's a problem. But there's a new process out there, but it's gonna take, it looks good, looks hopeful, they're building a facility, even got some federal money in it from the Department of Energy. But it's gonna take, I believe, 7, 8, 10 years before we can know for sure whether or not that's gonna work on the giant scale. On a medium-sized scale, they're building a facility to try to use it. But the regulations are gonna come into place in the next 3 to 4 years on every coal-fired power plant that's new, that wanted to be built. And then there's rumors that they're gonna attach some of these to new ones. They haven't gone that far yet, but there are rumors that they're going to go there next. So, if we could just be reasonable and let the technology lead, put our money into the technology, we can make the whole world, not just our energy consumption, but the whole world's energy consumption less of a problem with pollutants. But instead, we're spending all this time going out and trying to put an end to the use of coal in the United States and really making it very expensive to do business here.
Well, and it's going to be devastating for not only for our country, but for your specific district.
Oh, we're losing jobs weekly.
Yeah.
Weekly, their business. And of course, people also don't realize that it's not just the coal miners. Okay, some people would say, I wouldn't. But some people might say, well, there's just a few mining jobs. But that's not true.
Yeah.
The miners make about $75,000 a year. You take, 100 jobs out of a community, sometimes it's more than that are making $75,000 a year. They're not selling any new cars at the Ford dealership.
No.
They're not selling any refrigerators. They're not selling that new sofa. They're not selling that TV.
Shuts the town down.
Shuts the town down. Even the Long John Silver's has difficulty staying in business if you take away enough jobs.
Yeah.
And so, because people can't afford to go eat. They have to, it's nothing wrong with eating at home, but they can't afford that luxury of going out once in a while to have dinner out. That makes it tough on the economy. And it's not just in our area, but it then ripples out because the trains that run through the district, both CSX and Norfolk Southern, have a presence in the district. And those trains, of course, carry the coal to the ports of Virginia, and there are people down there that have jobs related to coal. So, whether it's a hospital that uses coal to heat its facility, whether it's universities that use coal, because a lot of times they don't broadcast that, but that's what they're using.
So they do.
You're making everything more expensive, from college education to
It's a ripple effect.
buying a car.
Oh.
It all connects, and by not using coal, we're gonna make things more expensive in America, and we're gonna ship jobs overseas. Bad deal.
Yeah. We'll keep fighting
Oh, I
for
will.
coal.
I will.
And, this might come out of left field, but I really do get this question. I know I had family members that knew I was coming up to DC to talk to some of you folks. The NSA and the privacy, You know, that was news several weeks ago.
Yeah.
Still, now with the whole shutdown, it's kind of toned down a little bit. What is your position as far as the privacy that we have, the NSA, what's going on with that? I mean, once we lose one liberty,
Yeah, I'm
We
a
start
big
losing
believer
them,
that we need to
so.
rein in the NSA. I've given speeches on the floor on that. I think it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. I think you have to have a search warrant to go in. They have to know that, you know, I'm saying something or I'm doing something, or there's at least a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I'm doing something wrong before they go looking at my telephone records, before they seize my telephone records, before they look at my internet pages or so forth. Over the last few years, they have not done that. Some of those things they've admitted didn't fall in line with what the FISA court, that's the, you know, the secret court,
yeah.
has wanted. They've tried to correct that some, but I think we just have a bad law that makes the standard lower than a reasonable, articulable suspicion. That's what happens in all other cases.
Yeah.
Here, there just has to be a need, apparently, that someday they might want to look at it. So they're storing all of our phone records out in Utah or
Area
someplace.
51?
Who knows? But they're storing all of our phone records. They're taking a lot of liberties that I don't think they should. And I've got a whole historical lecture you probably don't have time to hear on why that's clearly in violation of the principles of the Constitution. I think it's in violation of the clear meaning of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you don't agree with that, the Founding Fathers recognized that the government, as represented by the King or agents of the King, shouldn't have the ability to go round up everything because they're looking for one bad actor. They were actually looking for somebody that was writing bad things about George III in London. And the English decided general warrants weren't such a good idea. The Americans also decided that general warrants or writs that were issued for cooperation by merchants, it just wasn't the way to do things. And so on both sides of the Atlantic, the Anglo-American sensibility said, this isn't right, and both sides dealt with it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And sometimes it's really scary. You pick up a cell phone, you think, who's listening in?
Well,
Even if you're saying nothing, it's just who's listening in. But even if they're not listening, I guess they're housing it somewhere so that later on.
they're great. Now, they're not, in
How do
all
you
fairness,
fix that? How do you fix that?
we're going to change the law, and we're working on some bills now to do that. And in fairness, so that I don't scare people unnecessarily, they're not actually saving your phone conversations. However, if you call my phone number,
Mm-hmm.
they're logging that in, and that's being stuck in the data banks that they're keeping on us, so that somewhere down the road, if they want to, they can say, aha, Morgan Griffith called person X, called person Y, called person Z, and we don't like Morgan Griffith, so let's go see what X, Y, and Z are doing.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think it's right.
It's not right. I don't think it's right either. Well, I appreciate the time that you have given me because I know you all have been very busy up here trying to do the best that you can for not only your state but for America in general.